Hi, I'm Francis Hellier, and welcome to my brand new podcast, Metaverse. This is a podcast for the future-minded, a series for anyone on the hunt for the next big thing and all its possibilities and implications. This is Tomorrow's World Today. With each episode, I will chat to those at the top of their fields, from futurists in crypto and space travel to forecasters in business and tech. Together, we will ask the question, what's next? Today, I'm joined by Anthony Scaramucci, self-made entrepreneur, founder of SkyBridge Capital and the prestigious SALT conference, which has become the foremost gathering for investors, policy experts, politicians and business leaders around the world. SkyBridge Capital entered the Bitcoin market with their own fund, making itself one of the most well-established financial institutions to launch a Bitcoin product. In 2017, Anthony famously served as White House Director of Communications for 11 days, or as Scaramucci as it's now known. He is the author of 4 books and hosts Mooch FM, a podcast that explores the top stories of the week with the biggest names in media, business, politics, and beyond. Anthony, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, Francis, thank you. What an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to you. And of course, a Scaramucci is an 11-day period of time, which you pointed out. You know, some people say 10 days and it hurts my feelings. So I'm super glad that we're able to get that in.
I'm going to use that all the time now. So every interval of my life is going to be 11 days.
It was 11 very rough days. I have to confess that to you. I wouldn't wish those days on anybody because, you know, it's ugly in there, man. And ask General Kelly. Maybe I can get you General Kelly someday to come on your podcast and he can tell you how ugly it actually was. But I appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you.
So before we talk about your experience in the White House, let's go back a bit and talk about your childhood in New York. How did that shape the person you've become?
Well, you know, look, I mean, we could sugarcoat it. I mean, sometimes people like to sugarcoat their childhoods and they like to sugarcoat over their mistakes and their trials and tribulations. So I don't like doing that because if you grow up in a blue collar neighborhood and you're listening to your podcast, I want to tell people the truth. You know, they know the high levels of dysfunctionality that sometimes exist in these sorts of families. So my dad was a very hard guy. He was rough on us in the house. He was a laborer. He worked as a crane operator. My mom was a housewife. They were a traditional Italian-American family, so they were Catholic. My parents are still alive. They got married in 1957. Okay. So they are married 64 years, Francis. Okay. They have put 350 years of fighting into a 64-year marriage. And that's the best way I could describe it. And so the result of that, the family motto has always been, let's keep the word fun in the word dysfunctional. And so when you're growing up like that, a lot of self-parenting happens and a lot of, you have to make certain decisions of where you're going to go in life. You know, I could have very easily gotten a job in a union. I watched my friends in high school. They went into sheetrocking and they were clamming out in Long Island Sound and they were putting in auto glass or cutting deli meats at the local delis or making pizza, frankly. And I said, okay, I'm not gonna do this. And there was a seminal moment for me. I'm 16. I can tell you the exact date, June 30th, 1980. I'm 16 years old. And Lou Campanelli, the store manager of the local supermarket, he's like, Anthony, come to the front desk. And I'm there with my little apron on. And he says, okay, some drunk in the Coca-Cola truck backed into the loading bay and all the glass bottles came off the back of the truck. And he's like, you got to go out there and sweep it up. It was 90 degrees out and I had the sweeper and the yellow jackets were coming up my pants and into my apron and they were stinging the living daylights out of me. And I sat there, I said, okay, this is it, man. I'm going to work inside. Okay. I'm going to get a job someday in my life where there's no heavy lifting. I'm out of direct sunlight and I'm working indoors. And so, you know, every once in a while in your life, you have these epiphanies. That was me getting stung by these yellow jackets. So I hustled my way into college. I ended up going to law school. My parents had no idea the difference between these schools. My father and mother thought I was going to Hartford Law School. So my mother had the map out and she was going to take me to Hartford, Connecticut. I'm like, what are you doing, Ma? She says, well, aren't you going to Hartford Law School? I said, no, I'm going to Harvard Law School. Well, why would they call it Hartford Law School if it's not in Hartford? It's not called Hartford Law School. That's the dysfunctional family I grew up in, you know. And when I had my first job interview at Goldman Sachs, I was in a polyester suit, Francis. I was fully flammable for my first job interview. Okay, at any moment, if a match struck, my whole thing could have caught on fire. Okay, this was petroleum products made into a suit. And I also had a 100% polyester shirt on at the time as well, which are very easy. You don't even have to dry clean those. I mean, you just wash them and you put them in a dryer. And the guy from Goldman looked at me. He's like, you know, you're a smart kid, but you are the worst dressed person that we've ever met at the Harvard Law School. I remember looking at him thinking, what is he talking about? This is like my best suit. What the hell is he talking about? And that is the rite of passage, my friend. Okay, you don't go from a blue collar neighborhood, never hit a golf ball, never swing a tennis racket into the halls of Goldman Sachs easily. It's not easy. And there's a lot of self-consciousness. There's a lot of doubt. And there's a lot of fear, frankly. And so I probably gave you more than you wanted. But that's exactly how it went down.
So how did you end up in the White House? And can you tell us a bit about what that experience was like?
I ended up in the White House because of my pride and my ego. And I made a faulty decision. And so this should be a cautionary tale for all metaverse listeners. Check your ego and your pride at the door when you're making your decisions, because what happened to me is I had no network coming out of school. Yes, I went to Harvard. That's an old boys network, but I was a young boy in an old boys network. And so I had no network. And so the fastest way to achieve a network in the United States as a 25-year-old was to go into political fundraising. And so I wrote my first check in 1989 to Rudolph Giuliani. He was running for mayor. He ran unsuccessfully. And I started to build my political network, which led to very wealthy and influential people, which helped me grow my business. And so I was the garden variety Republican fundraiser. If Jeb Bush, and I always tease Jeb when I see him, if Jeb Bush had gone on to become president, Anthony Scaramucci would have been nowhere near the White House, possibly at the Christmas party, possibly, okay, but nowhere near the White House. But Donald Trump defeated all these guys. He recruited me into his campaign. I thought I was doing the loyal thing as an erstwhile Republican, so I joined his campaign. He then had a short staff. We were thin. And so I started doing a tremendous amount of media for him. He liked my television appearances. He kept putting me on TV. When he won the election, which nobody thought he was going to win the election, not even Donald Trump, he then came to me and he said, listen, I want you to come work for me. I'm like, well, I don't really want to do that. I have a business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a politician. I'm hosting a show for the Fox Business Channel called Wall Street Week. I've got an asset management company that I started from scratch. And I like the money that I'm making and I like my family. I'm not going to do that. And then I made the mistake. He seduced me. He put me on his advisory committee, his executive transition committee. And then I was out there staffing the Treasury with Stephen Mnuchin and working on different sub-cabinet position interviews. And he said, look, you got to come down here and work for me. And then that's when the pride and ego kicked in. There I was, a blue-collar kid, had grown up in a modest background, went to Tufts and Harvard, built a couple of successful businesses. Now I got the chance to work for the president of the United States. My wife, who probably hates Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. I mean, you got to give Melania her due. She probably hates him more than my wife, but Deirdre's up there. She's like, are you crazy? You can't go work for this guy. He's nuts. And I chose to overlook that. I wanted to put a square peg in a round hole to fit my self-narrative. And of course, when you have that level of hubris and you have that level of egocentrism, you can get blindsided. And I got blindsided. But, you know, by the way, I got fired because I made a mistake in the White House. I said something about Steve Bannon, which was ridiculously funny. Your listeners can go look it up. You know, I don't want to, it's probably not age appropriate for your podcast, but I did say something really funny about the guy. I said it to an Italian kid from Long Island whose family had known my family for 50 years. He was a journalist, though, and that's my bad. I have to own that mistake. He ran to CNN with it. I thought we were talking off the record. He said to me, I technically didn't say off the record. I said, come on, guy, we know each other forever. Didn't matter. He wanted to write that story about me. And I said, well, you're going to get me fired from the White House. And he didn't care. He wrote the story, and I got fired from the White House. But you know what? Here's another moral. When you're getting fired, there's no reason to take it that personally. I looked at General Kelly. I said, well, I hope when this is over, you and I can be friends. And John Kelly and I are very close personal friends. We've done 7 speaking engagements now around the world, including in Abu Dhabi. And we talk about our trials and travails in the White House. We talk about what it was like for him to fire me on that fateful day. And we talk about how we built our relationship after the firing. So, listen, I mean, that's life, man. What are you going to do?
Exactly. Now, Anthony, you and I both share an interest in crypto and blockchain. How did you become interested in that whole area, and where do you see it going?
So that's a really good question. I got interested in 2017. My other piece of trivia in my life, for 3 weeks, I was the chief strategy officer at the XM Bank before I went over to the White House to be the comms director. And so I'm sitting at the XM Bank and I'm working there, and I'm learning about dollar digitization, yuan digitization, and why these fiat currencies will ultimately digitize and end up in smart wallets on our phones. And so I make a note of myself, okay, this is the future. I've got to understand this better. I get fired. I come back to SkyBridge. One of the great things about getting your butt fired is if you own your own company, you just go back to your company. You know what I mean? It's very hard to cancel it if you own your own business. So went back to my company. I bought the URL skybridgebitcoin.com. And my staff said, well, what the hell are you doing? Bitcoin, blah, blah. I said, well, look, we got to understand this, because if they're working on it in the government, the idea of digitizing the dollar, which I predict will happen inside of this decade. So before 2030, there'll be a digitized dollar to compete against these other currencies. We got to understand the blockchain. We have to understand the magnificence of it and what it means for the future of the global society and what decentralized finance means. And it took us a couple of years. I'm not going to move quickly on things like this because I really needed to understand it. But once I felt that the network was expanding and I felt that my team had a good understanding of it, we weighed in. We started buying these coins in October and November of last year, which was well timed. We had probably almost 850 million US dollars worth of these coins, Bitcoin and Ethereum. I suspect that before the end of September, I'll be announcing another fund, which is a different altcoin, which one I think is going to be very successful. And, I think it's part of our future. And I also think that people that don't understand it will wax negatively about it. But once they understand it, like I'll give you an example, a friend of mine, Ray Dalio, one of the most successful hedge fund managers in the world, negative on Bitcoin, did the homework, now owns Bitcoin. I can't tell you the number of people that were cynical about it, that have learned more about it, that have decided to own a piece of it. And it's going to be a part of our future.
Do you think governments and banks are actually scared of crypto?
No, I don't think they're scared because it's so early. Was Sears Roebuck, the largest retailer in the United States, scared of Amazon? They were not. And Sears Roebuck is basically effectively no longer with us, and Amazon is. And so I think it's so early that they're not scared. There's a very famous story in the United States about a young entrepreneur named Jerry Yang. He was a computer programmer at Stanford. He invented this search protocol that he was teasingly calling Yahoo. And he descended upon the Pacific Bell telecommunications executives, and he said, hey, I got this really neat idea. You don't have to print these yellow page books anymore. You can use this logarithmic protocol and you can search people's names and phone numbers, and it will truncate all of the production and all of the dyed yellow paper. They looked at him and said, okay, what do you want for this thing? Well, I want to sell it to you for $1 million. Well, thank God for Jerry, he didn't sell it. Because he went on to become a billionaire as a result of this invention. But it tells you about those executives. Those executives laughed in his face and said, listen, what we do is we kill millions of trees, we dye the paper yellow, and we ship millions of those books out to our customers. They're this big. You can use them for a doorstop. And that's been our business for 50 years. We're not going to do anything different. And so I think that's a big mistake for people. And so, no, they're not scared. Should they be scared? Yes. The smarter ones will start to adapt the nature of DeFi into their business plans so that they don't get meleeed by it. But many of them are going to get meleeed by this over time.
I think that's right. And I also think there's so many coins out there, Nick, and it gets really confusing. So from your experience, if someone was interested in investing in Bitcoin, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would do a couple of different things. Okay. Look, I brought props for your podcast. See, I would recommend Dominic Frisby's book. He's been on my podcast. Dominic is a British journalist and actually a stand-up comedian, but he's brilliant on Bitcoin. He wrote this book in 2014. It's called Bitcoin, the Future of Money. You can purchase it on Amazon. It's available everywhere. And it's a very good synopsis of what's going on in Bitcoin. And what I love about this book is it was written in 2014, and he predicts a lot of the things that have happened over the last 7 years. And I would tell people, you have to understand it. Don't buy it as a speculative asset. It is early. I can prove to you that in an early adoption story, there's tremendous volatility, because people didn't understand Amazon in the beginning. And so you saw this thing rocketing, and then you also saw it crashing. There were 8 periods of time throughout Amazon's history as a public company where it lost at least 50% of its value. Yet if you bought 10,000 shares of Amazon in 1997, May 15th, when it went public, that's worth $21,140,000 today. However, you would have had to subject yourself to those 8 periods of time where you lost 50% of its value. If you were a Bitcoin holder at the beginning of the year, you were doing great until May came upon you. You lost 35% of your money in May. And if you shed your assets, then sold them, you missed out on the explosive 69% rise in Bitcoin from its low in May. And so to me, this is a long-term hold. It requires people to do some research, and it also requires them to understand how to store it effectively. You don't want to necessarily put it on your wallet where you end up losing it, God forbid. You got to have it in a place that is a good place to domicile the Bitcoin or the other crypto assets. I do the Bitcoin review every Wednesday. We took a little bit of hiatus during the summer. We'll start up next week again, SkyBridge Bitcoin review. It's a 1-hour symposia. We take questions from the audience. It's a live event. We get anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people that will log in. So it's a lot of fun for us to do it. We then can those things, put it up on our YouTube channel. But I think the SkyBridge Bitcoin review for me is an educational thing. I make it free. It's easily accessible. And I think what we're trying to do with the SkyBridge Bitcoin review is signal to people that we're in it. We're in it for the long haul. You can be in it with us, and we want to be open source with our knowledge of Bitcoin and other things that we're working on. So to me, I like doing it, and it's I think it can be educational. And also we take tough questions. People beat us up. At the end of May, we had people on there railing on us because, you got this wrong. Bitcoin has gone back to the price that it was at on January 1. Well, I don't know. I don't think we've gotten it wrong. It's just a matter of timing and perspective.
Let's go back to politics. What does the future hold for America and its democracy? It's been a crazy few years, really. Where do you think this is all going to end up?
Well, again, I think it's important that you point that out. It has been a crazy few years, but it's multiple decades. It's not Donald Trump per se. I can take you back, and there's an amazing book that I would recommend to your metaverse listeners called The Reign of Terror. It was written by Ackerman. It came out in August, and it is a very good synopsis of what's gone on in our civilization over the last 20 years from 9/11. Ultimately, Osama bin Laden said about America that he was going to bring down America. He said that he would attack us on our soil. Why did he want to attack us? Well, we put air bases near Mecca and Medina. We also he wanted help from us. If you remember, we funded him. He was famously known as a patriot and a member of the Mujahideen, the holy warriors that fought against the former Soviet Union. When that was a successful outcome, He then asked us to build schools in Afghanistan. Reagan put in the request. Tip O'Neill said no. So that frustrated Osama bin Laden. We then executed the Gulf War by putting airstrips in Iraq. And the reason I'm giving all of this as a backdrop is that set him off, and he started terrorist attacks. One was in Africa at our embassies. The other was the USS Cole. Then you had the 93 World Trade Center bombing. And then, of course, you had the crash into the Trade Center in the Pentagon and what happened in Shanksville. And what did bin Laden say? He said that our empire would overreact. We would come to his territory. We would spill blood and treasure. We would leak out, have tremendous deficit spending. We'd start fighting with each other over our liberties. And we would turn our security state on its own people, as opposed to the expression of our freedom. And he would weaken our empire. So how do you think he did? How do you think he did, Francis? I think he did pretty well, actually. You know, if you look to use a sports metaphor, you're from the UK, but you know, this is middle innings in baseball. I think it's 3-0 bin Laden. Okay, he's hurt us, and in the process of hurting us, what Spencer Ackerman writes in The Reign of Terror, how the 9/11 era destabilized America and produced Trump. What happened was we focused on a lot of the wrong things. We didn't rebuild our infrastructure. We didn't focus on our manufacturing, our industrial policy. We didn't focus on right sizing or reinvigorating our education protocols from K through 12, the early education into high school. And a result of which we have a broken country now, and we have a country that is receding into its specific tribes. That is bad news for the United States. Moreover, our adversaries get that they can wedge the country. They can use robotic technology on social media, and they can create these fictitious personalities, and they can drum up levels of hatred and fake news and disinformation that's further breaking apart the country. So that's what we're up against right now. We don't have strong leaders in the country right now that'll actually explain everything I just said to the American people and then come up with a long-term plan to cure that. But my hope springs eternal because we've got a lot of great things going on. A lot of new technologies are happening. And I think we're gonna fix it, but it's gonna take us longer than it should to fix.
Growing up, everybody in school wanted to be an American. It was everyone's aspiration. It was the real dream. I think some of the shine's gone off in recent years, but America still has the ability to reinvent itself and comes up with the most wonderful technologies and businesses that very few countries are able to come anywhere close to.
You get a chance in America, Francis. You get a chance. Don't forget that, okay? I can't live the life that I lived in Europe. You know, my grandfather and his father before him, my great-great-grandfather and great-grandfather, they were all masons. They work with their hands, they mix concrete, and they put brick, and they laid brick. You get a chance in America. Lee Kuan Yew, the now deceased founder of Singapore, former prime minister and president there, he said, never, ever write off America. America has a distinctive competitive advantage relative to the rest of the world. You can go to America, and in 5 short years, you're American. You could be British American, Italian American. You could be Chinese American. But you can't go to China and be American Chinese or British Chinese. You can't go to Japan and have that happen. And so the United States can draw on the 7 billion other people and all the intellectual resources of those people. And one thing I learned in my life, Francis, that I'll share with you and your listeners is that the kids in my neighborhood were as smart as those kids that went to Eton or went to a famous boarding school in the US or went to Harvard. I used to sit in my dorm at Harvard Law School and look at the people that I went to school with and say, hey, fellas, the kids in my neighborhood are as smart as you. They just didn't get the same opportunity. They didn't have the same advantages that you've had. And wake up. And that's America. America is kids like me growing up with nothing. We don't have to subscribe to the caste system or the aristocracy of Europe. We can break out and we can achieve and we can live aspirational lives. And so we have to fix that. And I expect that we will because we don't really have a choice not to. So usually, as Churchill once said about America, we always do the right thing. only after we exhaust every other possibility. So we'll see what happens, but I predict that we'll figure it out.
Do you think technology is the driver that will get us through the difficulties of the current age?
I do. I think we're about to break out again. I think that this is very similar to the 1920s. We had a global pandemic. The 1920s was the introduction of the highway systems around the world. It was the introduction of electrification, telecommunications into the rural areas, and lo and behold, radio technology, broadcast technology, flight. All of these things were happening in the 1920s, the commercialization of these amazing technologies, which led to the era of modernity for the world. That very same thing is upon us right now. We're about to break out of a pandemic. The pandemic will eventually end. It will take longer than we'd like it to, but will end. And when it does, we'll be back at work. We'll be traveling. And we'll have the introduction of things like 5G. I'm talking real 5G, which is totally transformative in terms of the way you can carry data across the global network. You've got satellites being launched by SpaceX that are going to give you the access to the internet from the top of Mount Everest. You've got robotic technology. You have AI. You have automation in driving and logistics and the improvement of all those technologies. You have programmable biotech now, where we can figure out what's going on in your genetic code, and whatever the faulty mechanisms or programs there, we can install different programs to improve your health. All of these things will bring a abundance to the world. The issue for the West and for capitalist nations is, how do we push that further and further into the population? How do we deepen the wealth of the population? And how do we do that without socialism? Because what we know about socialism is very corruptive. It disincentivizes the human spirit. And so what we need to do is we need a capitalist system that's working, but one that is focused on fairness as well. I'm all about unequal outcomes, okay? If Jeff Bezos wants to build his own rocket and shoot himself into space after he created all this public good for our society, God bless him. But what I don't like is the unequal opportunity. You know, we're smart enough, we're rich enough, we should have equal opportunity. So regardless of where you grew up or where you got started, can we offer a package of services to people that include good health care and a reasonably well-constructed educational footprint? Right now in the United States, if you tell me the zip code of the kid, I can tell you whether or not the kid can get a good education. In the rich areas, yes. In the poor areas, no. How could we allow that as a society? How could we forsake all of that great human capital through our indifference? And so we have to figure that out, and we will.
I completely agree. We're at the forefront of a fantastic revolution, I think. If you think about the companies that were born of the financial crisis and where we are today, it's just incredible to think about who's dreaming up all these ideas. And I think blockchain, going back to that point, is fundamental to these ideas. Again, spreading the wealth and giving people opportunities to rise up and create for themselves. So it's a really exciting time. Tell me a bit about your Mooch FM podcast, which I was honored to be a guest on not so long ago. Where can people find it?
Well, you know, we are at mooch.fm on the internet. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Mooch FM. Podcast Partners does an amazing job for us. I know that they're also working with you. And we're starting to get some traction. We've had some great guests, including yourself. And we try to talk about things that are topical and of interest. But also, for me, what I find interesting about a podcast like your podcast is we're really trying to examine what is going on with a critical but objective eye. And so I like bringing on people like that. In fact, Holly and I are going to reach out to Spencer Ackerman, who wrote Reign of Terror, and I'm going to bring him on because I think we need to understand the mistakes that we made in Afghanistan and Iraq over the last 2 decades and how we're going to fix ourselves going forward. Can't change the past, as we both know, but the future could be very bright if we act properly.
And talking about the future, what does the future hold for Anthony Scaramucci?
Well, I'm hoping to lose weight. Okay. I mean, that's my number one objective.
You
right
and me
now.
both. You and me both.
I got to tell you, man, COVID, I didn't get COVID, but I feel like I got the COVID 19 pounds. Okay. Or for you people, 10 kilos. I don't know. I feel terrible. I got to lose weight. So that's my number one objective right now. My secondary objective is to grow my company and keep mindfulness of my 5 children. And for whatever reason, my wife still likes me, possibly loves me. So I've got to keep that going. If I ever foray into politics, let me leave you with this thought. It's a garish thought. Most Italians can survive 1 or 2 circumcisions. What we cannot survive is a castration. Okay. So, I got to be very careful. If I ever go into politics, okay, that could come with a guillotine. And I'm not talking about a head chopping. There are other heads that can be chopped, okay, which wouldn't be fun for me.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for appearing on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Metaverse, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Francis.
You've been listening to Metaverse with me, Francis Hellier. Thank you to my guest, Anthony Scaramucci, for a brilliant conversation. Tweet us at MetaversePod with any suggestions or feedback, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please share a link on social media. You can sign up to receive an email when a new episode drops at our website, metaverse.fm.